408. That is the number of characters in the first cipher the killer sent. A puzzle, a mockery, a confession. And when solved, it launched a nationwide manhunt for a man who signed his name with a circle and a cross. This is the file of the Zodiac Killer, an American horror story that remains terrifyingly incomplete. The killer's shadow had already fallen across California. He was responsible for the brutal execution of two young couples on lovers' lanes. But in August 1969, the killing stopped being quiet. The killer felt invisible, and he decided he didn't want to be a secret anymore. He mailed 3 identical letters to California's largest newspapers. They were filled not just with details of his past crimes, but with demands. His arrogance was overwhelming. "Publish my story on the front page," he ordered the press, "or I will kill again. I have a list of targets. 12 more victims will follow." 12. The sheer scale of the threat was paralyzing. Every town in the Bay Area felt the shadow of his promise. But the most audacious part was the code. The killer was gambling his freedom on his intellect, daring the police and the Federal Bureau of Investigation to challenge his mind. A dedicated school teacher and his wife, driven by a primal need for answers, cracked the code. And the message, delivered in blocky, cold lettering, offered no motive, only malice. "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is better than killing wild game in the forest." He was pure ego. He willingly gave the police the blueprint to his sadistic mind. He was so convinced of his genius, that he practically handed them his full confession. And here is the file's unbreakable paradox: he told them exactly who he was, and yet, for 50 years, the combined forces of the state of California could not, and did not, catch him. The question is not who he was. The terrifying question is, when he left so many clues, how did this arrogant monster remain a phantom? To understand the terror of the Zodiac Killer, we must step back from the blinding spotlight of the media storm, and look into the initial silence. Before the ciphers, before the letters, there was only the sound of gunfire on quiet, desolate roads. The first attack occurred on December 20, 1968. The setting was Lake Herman Road, a notorious lover's lane in Vallejo, California. David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, a young couple on their first date, were parked on a gravel turnout. What happened next was not a robbery gone wrong or a crime of passion, it was an execution. A car pulled up. A man, who would become Zodiac, approached them. The file states that Jensen managed to run, attempting a desperate escape into the dark. She made it less than 30 feet before the bullets found her. Faraday was shot execution style next to the car. The police were baffled. No known motive, no connection to the victims, no witnesses. The murder felt random, cold, and utterly terrifying. The killer seemed to vanish into the night. It was an anomaly. But anomalies rarely travel alone. 7 months later, on July 4, 1969, the killer struck again, just 4 miles away, at a popular spot called Blue Rock Springs Park. Another young couple, Darlene Farron and Mike Majow, were sitting in a car when a vehicle pulled up behind them. This time, the killer used a blinding spotlight to disorient them. When he opened fire, Farron was killed instantly. Majow was shot multiple times, but miraculously, he survived. The file notes this shift: the killer was growing bolder. He was controlling the light. He was honing his craft. But the most chilling moment came 40 minutes after the attack. A man called the Vallejo Police Department Dispatch Center. His voice was calm, almost professional, and completely devoid of emotion. He reported the shootings, gave the location, and claimed responsibility for the murders on Lake Herman Road. Connecting the two scenes, he finished his confession by saying, "I am the one who did it." And he hung up. The investigation was now officially underway, yet the police were chasing a ghost who had the audacity to use his own name on the phone. This was a man seeking credit, demanding recognition. He craved the attention that only true terror could provide. It was this relentless need for public acknowledgement that drove him less than a month later to compose the 3 letters containing the 408-character cipher. The Zodiac Killer was not satisfied with the small, local terror of a double homicide. He wanted the world to see him. And with the threat of 12 more victims hanging over the state, the entire public was now forced to look. This was the moment the quiet, cold-blooded killer was reborn as a media mastermind. The stage was set for his highest crime yet, a brazen, terrifying act that would take place right in the heart of San Francisco. The killer had tasted the spotlight. The letters and the cipher had fed his massive ego. Now, he needed to prove his threats were real, and his methods were evolving, becoming more theatrical, more cruel. On September 27, 1969, the Zodiac Killer left the cover of darkness and silence. He moved his stage to Lake Berryessa, a beautiful, isolated spot where two students, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, were enjoying a quiet afternoon. The attack was unlike anything the state had ever seen. The killer didn't just ambush them, he confronted them. He approached the couple wearing an elaborate costume. It was a hooded, dark outfit, almost like an executioner's cloak. Across the chest of his hood, stitched in cold white thread, was the terrifying symbol of his authority, the circle with a cross through it. He was no longer a shadow. He was an executioner, delivering his own form of brutal justice. He carried a gun and, chillingly, a long rope. He didn't just want to kill, he wanted to control their final moments. He forced the terrified students to tie each other up with the rope. He then plunged a knife into them repeatedly. 17 times. Shepard was killed. Hartnell miraculously survived to give the police the most detailed description of the killer's costume and behavior to date, but Zodiac was not finished with his performance. On the door of Hartnell's car, he scrawled a terrifying message: Vallejo, December 68, July 69, Sept 69. He wasn't trying to hide the crime. He was claiming it. He was building his terrifying resume. The police were now facing a monster who dressed up for his murders. A man driven not by logic, but by pure, theatrical malice. Yet, his greatest act of arrogance was still to come. Just 2 weeks later, on October 11, 1969, Zodiac brought his terror directly into the densely populated heart of the city San Francisco. Taxi driver Paul Stein picked up a passenger at the intersection of Mason and Geary Streets. The cab was driven to the quiet, upscale neighborhood of Presidio Heights. This was the killer's most public move yet, a brazen act of defiance against the very core of the city. Zodiac shot Stein in the head. This time, he didn't run immediately. He took a terrifying souvenir. The killer deliberately ripped a section of blood-soaked fabric from Stein's shirt. His objective was simple and terrifying. He wanted to send undeniable proof directly to the newspapers. He wanted them to know he could operate anywhere, anytime. The police were given a brief, tantalizing glimpse of the killer as he walked away, a sighting that was disastrously miscommunicated through police radio. The failure to catch him in that moment became one of the greatest missed opportunities in American criminal history. He completed his challenge 2 days later by mailing the blood-soaked swatch of Stein's shirt to the San Francisco Chronicle. The letter began with a chilling confirmation. "This is the Zodiac speaking." The game had reached its climax. The monster was now established as a genuine threat to every citizen in California. The stage was set. It was time for the investigation to begin. The terror was real. The evidence, however, was sparse. Zodiac had successfully terrified the state, but the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the local police departments were about to engage him in a war of wills, using science and psychology against his arrogance. Zodiac thought his ciphers and costume were his defense. In reality, his ego was his greatest vulnerability. Every time he communicated, he left behind a trail of psychological and physical breadcrumbs, and the detectives were relentless in picking them up. The first major weapon the investigation used was the psychological profile. They analyzed every word in his letters. The grammar, the spelling, the theatrical tone, it all painted a picture of a meticulously organized individual, obsessed with control and likely possessing an intimate knowledge of police procedures, perhaps even working near law enforcement or the military. He was not a random killer, he was a meticulous planner. But the physical evidence was maddeningly limited. They had a few partial fingerprints, some fragments of the blood-soaked shirt, and the most crucial item, the saliva residue left on the stamps and envelopes of his taunting letters. This was the DNA evidence of the future, locked away in a time capsule. For decades, the investigation focused relentlessly on one man, Arthur Lee Allen. Allen was the perfect villain for a case this dark. He had a history of obsession, lived near one of the crime scenes, and had been known to boast about his plans to kill couples. Most tellingly, he owned a watch brand called Zodiac. The police interviewed Allen multiple times. They executed search warrants. They collected his fingerprints and handwriting samples. The original investigation became an obsessive pursuit of this man. But here was the crippling failure in the 1970s. The handwriting samples were ruled out. The fingerprints were not a perfect match. The case hit a terrifying dead end. Zodiac had seemingly won. He had forced the state to focus all its resources on his favorite suspect, only to laugh when the evidence was inconclusive. He had beaten the system. However, the detectives who worked the original case did one thing perfectly. They refused to let the file die. They meticulously preserved every single piece of physical evidence. The letters, the stamps, the envelopes, the cipher fragments, they were all carefully catalogued and stored. This preservation, this quiet, decades-long faith in the future of forensic science, is the real reason the Zodiac Killer was finally caught, decades after he went silent. Fast forward to the 21st century. Technology evolved beyond the wildest dreams of the 1970s detectives. The partial fingerprints could be analyzed again. The microscopic traces of DNA on the envelope saliva could finally be isolated. A new technique, genetic genealogy, offered the ultimate breakthrough. By comparing the killer's DNA to vast public ancestry databases, investigators could build a family tree, narrowing the focus from millions of people down to a single family line. The file of the Zodiac Killer will forever be known as a failure of the 1970s. But it is also a stunning victory for the 21st century. The killer thought his silence had protected him. He thought he had outsmarted the police by leaving conflicting clues. He was wrong. His greatest mistake was his ego-driven need to communicate. His second greatest mistake was licking that stamp. His DNA was a time bomb. The lesson from the Zodiac file is clear: you cannot outrun science. You cannot outrun the microscopic evidence left behind. The physical proof is patient, and eventually, it will name you. The files we have examined paint a clear picture of a man consumed by his own spotlight. Zodiac was a theatrical genius, a master manipulator of the press, and a cold-blooded killer. But despite the relentless efforts of modern science, the ultimate file remains tragically ambiguous. As of today, the case of the Zodiac Killer remains officially unsolved by California law enforcement. While forensic advancements specifically in DNA and genetic genealogy have provided powerful, compelling evidence that points strongly toward a suspect or suspects, the legal bar for criminal conviction is incredibly high. The letters, the ciphers, the witnesses, they are all circumstantial, without that final, definitive court ruling. We must maintain that distinction: the prime suspects remain accused, but not convicted, under the law. This lack of finality is the lasting terror of the Zodiac Killer. He won the final, cruelest victory. He deprived the victims' families and the world of true closure. But the file teaches us something far more important than a name. It teaches us about the nature of evil, and the inevitability of evidence. The lesson: the Zodiac Killer was not caught, because he made the biggest mistake any predator can make. He allowed his ego to write checks his future couldn't cash. He thought his mask, his code, and his silence after the year 1974 would be his shield. He thought he had outsmarted the system by burying the clues in complexity. He failed to realize that every single action him took, sending a letter, placing a stamp on an envelope, wearing a distinct costume, was an indelible mark on the historical record. He did not vanish. He became a high-resolution, time-delayed piece of evidence. The law of physics states that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. In crime, for every action, there is a trace. The true hero of the Zodiac case is not a single detective, but the relentless, unwavering passage of time, and the explosion of forensic technology. They prove that no matter how clever the monster, no matter how long the silence, the microscopic evidence is patient. It will wait decades for the technology to catch up. The Zodiac Killer may have died a free man, but the secrets he tried to bury are now being revealed, piece by piece. His legacy is not one of genius, but of arrogance. The file of the Zodiac Killer has been examined. The chaos he caused, the arrogance he displayed, and the silence he kept for decades are now all under the microscope of history. He thought he was a ghost, an anonymous legend. But time is the only honest witness. Though the original case closed without a conviction, the file is never truly settled. The evidence is clear: the monster was found. Now it's just a matter of the law catching up. If you found this investigation chilling, subscribe to Secret Files. Which case should we reopen next? Let us know in the comments below.